This is update for June 18, 2022, day 115, end of the day update. We're gonna start with the strategic discussion. First of all, but heads up for those who are just in for frontline updates. There were literally no changes today. Things becoming very, let's say, positional, static. There is a strong but subjective feeling, obviously, that both sides we finally maybe reached a point where both sides are exhausted and not capable of making sort of large moves anymore on the front line. But this is obviously subjective, could be proven wrong. This is just based on sort of many sort of small sort of signals, and so could, as I said, could be wrong. So let's actually focus today on a few things. Today was a day of concentrated Russian attack on Ukrainian energy infrastructure. So Russian army hit and destroyed small scale oil refinery here in this area, actually not far from the front line. It's called Maryinka oil refinery. And that was actually the only one that was still working and producing gasoline, LPG, and diesel fuel. It's mostly focused on producing gasoline and LPG. So about like 70% of the volume are those, and relatively it didn't produce much diesel. This refinery was totally relying on Ukrainian crude oil and and natural gas condensate. So at this point, that's the only sort of last sort of remaining piece of production is gone totally. As I said, it was a small scale. The sort of the good about it was completely refurbished, renovated in 2018, so it was producing probably decent quality product. At the same time, it's probably not gonna be as bad for the Ukrainian army because, as I said, it's mostly was producing gasoline and LPG. So, and for those who don't know, essentially army is almost exclusively using diesel fuel, right? So this is probably gonna affect much more severely civilian population and sort of like civilian economy as opposed to military, but still obviously it's big negative, big sort of big loss. Then and just to explain a little bit how it's functioning right now in Ukraine after Russian attacks on the railroad infrastructure that reduced capacity, and then very say insane economic policies of Ukrainian government. So basically the flow of gasoline and diesel fuel went down quite a bit. So what was done actually, which was sensible decision, is actually, well, not terribly, but giving the whole insanity of the whole actions. So let's say the capacity went down from 100% to, let's say, 70%, right? So what was done is like, okay, we're gonna keep and diesel fuel, let's say, was 50%, right? So we'll keep diesel still at 50%, and only that remaining 20 we're gonna allocate to gasoline, right? So there's in Ukraine it's extremely severe shortages of gasoline, and then diesel fuel is sort of relatively available. It's still also really bad situation, but on a relative scale, there is more diesel fuel because it's needed for the army, so that's more available in general. That's how it works right now. So now let's go back to the Russian strikes. So the next one, oil refinery, which is large oil refinery, is near this town Kremenchuk. So it was hit some time ago, about months ago, by the Russian army. Before, it was not completely destroyed and damaged, so they sort of finished off today. Again, totally wiped out. Another complete wipeout. Then there is actually a refinery in Lysychansk, which obviously is not producing anything at this point, which is next to Severodonetsk for those who probably knew. So that was also a big, large, extremely large industrial scale refinery, also completely wiped out. The only thing, that refinery was obviously idle; it wasn't working for actually long, even before the war, because of the, again, terrible economic policies of Ukrainian governments. This is not just this government. This is sort of sequential situation where the economic policies are extremely, probably more harmful to the country than anything else in general. If we summarize, then there was another attack at a large fuel depot here, like a little bit, probably 20-30 kilometers east of Dnipro, which is, it's called Novomoskovsk, small town there. So there was a huge, quite, so it was destroyed as well. Basically, the point is, so it's very clear that Russian army or Russian command is attacking this energy to the, to in hope to stop Ukrainian army. There was another actually very interesting sort of piece to this, is that a Polish state oil and gas company called Orlen, which is Poland, is here, right? So for those, this is a country that's helping a lot Ukraine in this war, and so basically Russian hacker group Killnet attacked Orlan, and with DDoS attacks, and managed to affect some of their software that's related to logistics. What that really means is that because they cannot coordinate logistics like railroad transportation and all of that perfectly, that effect, because then the cycle of production or processing crude oil becomes longer, so it effectively brings down capacity as well there in Poland. So that's so you can see that this was kind of like sort of clever attack across all of the sources that Ukraine, where Ukraine is getting its refined products, because essentially one of the major suppliers, we don't know exact numbers, but roughly directionally 70-80% of diesel fuel and gasoline is coming from Poland, from Orlan, and then probably also some of it from Lithuania through the by sort of through the Poland anyway. So essentially this trying to kind of like um, very holistic attack on the supply of essentially diesel fuel, because that's what's being targeted more than anything. That's the goal: cut off supply of diesel fuel. There's also some supply from Romania, but that is relatively smaller amount. It's probably 10, 20, 25% of the consumption at this point. So that's the situation with the supply. Addition, there was a question from, and then on related note, there are numbers of how much. So Russia is increased the selling of crude oil to India, and also actually coal as well. So uh, then the actual numbers, Russia is selling 110 million um, US dollars worth of crude oil per day to India right now, and 16.5 million of coal to India. All was discounts, as we discussed before, but the last one of the previous videos, I mentioned the discount actually started to be smaller and smaller as the shortages on the global market of crude oil are developing. Then the India is willing to accept smaller discount, as and also India is seeing that Russia is switching more or less supply of its crude oil towards India, and then also much more towards China, right? So the whole, even in the speech at the Economic Forum that was probably 2 days ago in St. Petersburg, Russian President Putin even said that they refocusing everything to essentially Asian. That really what this means is China, and then India is another big consumer. So that's and then also Russia is getting a lot of their supply of goods or consumer goods and everything from China, right? So that's that's how it works right now. That's how it's being able to sort of partially survive with all of the sanctions from the West. So now actually let's switch to one of the questions from one of the viewers, and he was asking, can you actually describe a little bit more about the First Army Corps and the Second Army Corps? Like just generally provide more color on that. So this the First and Second Army Corps, they are formed on their territories that were captured by Russia from Ukraine in 2014. So this portion, like roughly half or a little bit less, like about 40% of Donetsk region was captured in 2014, and probably like 30% or 35% of Luhansk region was captured by Russia in 2014. So they created their sort of military units, because then you can use basically local human resources to fight with your enemy, which is to extent very logical move. The way they were organized from the very beginning is that all of the senior officer positions are exclusively Russian commanders from Russian regular army. They kind of sent there on rotational basis. So we don't know exact details, like it's year or 2 years, year and a half, or even 6 or 9 months, but something like that. Most likely a year and a half, they would be sent to kind of like work at this course, and the soldiers are almost exclusively local population, from their about level of the company side, from the company like commanders, company commanders, and higher are usually not in most cases are Russian regular Russian officers. The way they were sort of formed initially, they sort of the way they sort of recruited initially soldiers in those units. It was actually, there was sort of support of the local population. There were portion of the local population that supports Russia, right? So there was like they were motivated and ideologically charged. So in this so they were relatively motivated. At the same time, Russia never gave them sort of enough or quality weapons in the first place, right? So they were always relatively like poorly equipped. This actually became very apparent with the beginning of the war, when they literally giving steel helmets from essentially World War II, right? They only got like barely just like uniform. Some cases sort of to extent similar to actually to some units in Ukrainian army. They're giving some weapons, World War II weapons from Russian arsenal. They're giving this T-62 tanks. So basically, they treated like a not even second class citizens, but like a third class citizens, right? So, and then in the first phase of war, like February, March, and April, essentially all of those motivated soldiers were expended in frontal attacks on Ukrainian defenses. So then the sort of, call it the population of those cores, probably not the right word, but I think you understand what I'm saying, is it started to switch. Then the loc the basically sort of Russian military machine started to like forcefully conscript, they can, like literally catch conscripts, regular people on the streets, and and basically force them into this course. So in a way, this at this point is kind of like this local people, they're not terribly loyal sort of to Russia. They, kind of like okay to Ukraine, but they kind of like being caught between a rock and a hard place. And if you don't go into this second or whatever first army corps, you're gonna go to jail. So there is not much of really option for many people. So they just kind of like, okay, I'll just go there. And a lot of it is also driven by the economic fact, actually, because there is essentially no jobs in this region. So it's like extreme depression there. So even just to feed the family, a lot of people go there because there's no other jobs. So there's like little like coal mining activity, but but essentially for the number of population, it's totally not enough jobs. For that reason, actually, this used to be population of this two regions used to be like probably together closer to 7 million. So out of those, about, let's say, million and a half fled to Russia, then about million and a half fled to Ukraine. So the remaining population of this whole region is about 4 million at this point. Probably even less at this point, because probably more people with the start of the war fled. And not probably, we know from Russian sources that somewhere 3 to 5 to 700 people fled. But essentially, this is the whole, call it, tragedy of this region at this point. And generally, the problem of this region is that it was like sort of region of coal mines, essentially, right? And some steel mills, but mostly it's a coal mining region in the Soviet Union. And it's created like heavily paternalistic mentality in the people in this region. We're not saying that all of the Soviet people have this heavily paternalistic mentality, where they expect that the government will do things for them, and they don't. They essentially, what this means, that they lack initiative. But this region is sort of stands out, exceptionally stands out in that. So so in a way, that's part of the whole sort of situation here, is that um, how this how to say how this satisfaction of this region came about with just generally being in Ukraine. It's not so much on sort of like language or ethnic or whatever, but more from economic point of view, because Ukraine governments has been totally dysfunctional. And for that reason, when you have dysfunctional government, they basically don't fulfill expectation with people who have very heavy paternalistic expectations that where government will decide everything for them. And government doesn't decide, and government is itself is sort of mess, and kind of creating another sort of layer of problems to already difficult situation. So the whole industry was coal mines was like in total disarray, going bankrupt, laying off people. So it was area of sort of kind of like depressed area generally, right? So that created a lot of dissatisfaction in this region with like generally Ukraine, and it was very cleverly, this dissatisfaction was cleverly sort of funneled and was turned into sort of this language ethnic type of situation, as opposed to, but it really stems from economic problems that this region was experiencing and is still experiencing. But actually, in terms of, and then let's touch on this ethnic sort of situation since we brought this up. Nevertheless, the ethnic sort of split here, it's still majority Ukrainian population. It's slim majority. It's like about 55 to 60% Ukrainian, and then about, let's say, 35 Russian and 5% others. And but this is not, even though a lot of sort of sources view this way, it's really not exactly the right view. The root cause of all the problems is coming from economic problems that this region had a plenty of, right, and still has. So hopefully this is a little bit kind of like helps you to understand what's going on in the in this area, and to extend motivation of the people. And then and then going back to the first and second Army Corps and how it changes dynamically. So because of the attrition of all of those motivated and ideologically charged people, now it's mostly all of these forced conscripts, and the quality of the sort of fighting is terrible, basically, right? Because these people easily surrender. They don't they just do minimum, bare minimum, and they don't want to die, which is totally understandable. So the quality of these troops went down. There are some units there that are still kind of like battalion size, that are still sort of motivated and so on. But at large, all of that sort of motivated part was basically burnt out in February, March, and April time frame. So hopefully, and then in terms of how to say, population and ability to continue to fill this course through local population, it's at this point is extremely limited, because all of the sort of human resources that could be pulled already pulled into this course. And for example, I believe I don't remember if it was second or first Army Corps, but there was update few days ago from the sort of head, from someone in either LNR or DNR, but basically they're sort of call it official numbers, and they were citing 2.1 killed in action and 9.9 wounded in action. Just, I believe it was first Army Corps, not second one. These numbers seem to be a little bit, how to say, underreported, because we had numbers from about early May, and they were almost the same. And obviously, that's for months and a half of intense fighting. You're not gonna have the same, essentially, like no losses. So they essentially, you can see even from that, so that's about what 12,000 people that are gone from this course, and from the number of brigades, you can imagine that this is essentially means that on all brigades have like half of the strengths, right? Like, so what we discussed before, that you can always split the unit into sort of half of it is support and half of it is actually battle, like it goes on battlefield and fights. So that what this really means, because obviously those who support, they tend to survive for obvious reasons, and then those who fight, they obviously die off. So essentially, if you have half of it killed, eliminated, that really means that all of that sort of old battle fighting group is essentially gone, and it's refilled with all of these forced conscripts who totally are extremely poorly equipped, uh, like extremely poorly, like even the worst of the worst, really, really actually to extent depressing to look at that, uh, and then extremely poorly motivated because of that. So hopefully was a very long answer to this, and hopefully it helps to understand this situation. There was another question from another viewer about the sort of power relationship, power situation in Kiev, meaning in Ukrainian power situation, and so so the Ukrainian president. Let's just go back and see how things are sort of happen in Ukrainian political life. So the current president, he came in 2019 into power on the idea of actually making sort of changes and reforming country because everybody was super dissatisfied, right, with the previous president. It was kind of like a peaceful Maidan, right? You know, in many ways. So he had like huge support, like 73%, if I remember correctly. What that also meant, so not only he personally won, but then he brought to Ukrainian parliament supermajority. So his party um, essentially can do whatever they want, and they were doing whatever they want for all of this 2.5, whatever, 3 years at this point, I think. Um, Unfortunately, they didn't bring any sort of prosperity, and like the whole sort of promise of, well, I'm coming and to change everything actually turned out to be a political lie, to be very blunt. So as a result of that, uh, the support, uh, uh, personal and specifically for his party in parliament was going down to and down really like to very low levels, to the point that there was, before the war started in about November December time frame, there was open discussion that his party and him are not fit for to continue running the country. Like there are a lot of, there was open discussion about that in the country, and the ratings were sort of basically at very low level. Maybe not his personal as low, but his party was totally low, and there was a lot of allegations about corruption and typical situation, right, in Ukraine. So with the war, obviously that galvanized all of the population around the president, and especially he to extent redeemed himself by not just fleeing, because a lot of people were thinking that he's gonna just flee, right? So that was a very strong move by Zelensky by not fleeing, and that really galvanized a lot of people around him, and kind of like, okay, we just gonna forget all of their sort of past. We have enemy. Let's kind of work together. But essentially, he has full power everywhere. So he has full control of the parliament. He has full control of all of the basically to extent. It's so legitimate dictatorship, right? Where he got it because people in Ukraine wanted like radical changes in the country in many like aspects of its life, and it can only be done if the political party has majority, right, like super majority, and so that you don't have this coalition of many parties that are sort of have different views, and they just kind of forced to form coalition. It was very clear, okay, we have the vision, let's do it, right? That's so you're getting this majority, and as I mentioned, that did not happen, let's put it this way. So for now, in terms of like Ukrainian like government, like prime minister, everybody, all of them are basically under sort of control, were appointed, and could be totally quickly removed by the president, right? So in terms of so the only sort of, because of the war, the military become another sort of center of the power, right? Just due to the nature of the war. At the same time, there is no sort of, I'd say, sort of strong rift between the military and sort of political power. There is to extend because some of the decisions, let's say, to like uh, sort of political power sort of imposes some of the decisions on the military power, right? So based on what I hear is that, for example, idea to hold Severodonetsk at all cost is coming is a political is a political idea, right? It's not for military reasons, and probably if it were up to sort of just military power, the commander of Ukrainian armed forces, he probably would have withdrawn from Severodonetsk and basically on the western bank of the river. But and then if you remember, we showed this about whatever, like 20 days ago. That was sort of political commissar from president, and she's a member of the parliament. She came literally to the local headquarters in Severodonetsk region, and she was literally telling what to do to Ukrainian, you know, senior officers, essentially, right? I'm not sort of big fan of any sort of senior officers in Ukrainian and Russian army, but at the same time, like this political commissar is the worst and even like terrible idea, basically, right? This never works, leads to disasters. So thanks, and basically for that reason, the uh, that all of that sort of Ukrainian commanders, there was leak from that headquarters for that reason, right? Because none of them liked that, so they leaked the pictures of her sitting there and essentially commanding them what to do, and that sort of created huge backlash politically in the country, and that forced kind of like to pull back the political sort of power center from interfering into the military side of affairs. So at the same time, like there is sort of kind of how to say very relationship, but at the same time, everybody understands that if you rock the boat will sink. So everybody is on the same boat, and you need to row the boat otherwise, because you have much bigger threat in front of you. So hopefully that answers that question. Now let's actually do a quick walk through the front line. We're gonna do in a clockwise fashion, starting from the north. Again, exchange of artillery fire here in this sort of a quiet section of the front line, where the front line goes along actually state border. Now let's look what's going on in Kharkiv. Situation more or less the same. Pull push between two sides at the small size units, where the Russian side is trying to push Ukrainian side away from the border to create a buffer, and then also cut off, as we discussed, Ukrainian forces from the Starytsya, so that Ukrainian forces will not establish firm bridgehead, with the idea of potentially, pushing towards east and affecting Russian logistical lines. So that's the whole idea of the fighting here. It's small scale because all of the main resources and forces are pulled actually to Izyum and Severodonetsk area. By the way, even 72nd Brigade was pulled from here, and looks like 80th as well. So the only large and sort of coherent Ukrainian unit that in this area is 92nd Brigade. All of this, the rest is this Ukrainian militia units and volunteers, right, from US, UK. This is who we know. There are probably more countries, obviously. This is just because we know they're there, so that's the only reason we put them there. So now let's go a little bit south. Let's see what's going on here at Izyum bridgehead. The situation is stable. No new advances here near Krasnopilya and Dolyna, and nothing new at Bogorodychne, right? So the front line here is stable. which are the two most critical points here at this point, because obviously the objective, Russian objective, is this town Slavyansk. There was bigger objective actually, this town Barvinkova, which if Russian forces attacked it, this would be actually much more damaging to the Ukrainian side and much more dangerous, but they just simply don't have resources to do that at this point. So they're focusing on the smaller piece of the pie. Now let's keep going. Let's look what's going on at Severodonetsk salient. So situation is obviously difficult here in Severodonetsk, as we discussed. It's being sort of held for political reasons, and and if you remember, initially on the first or second day of attack, essentially the Ukrainian defenses quickly crumbled and collapsed, and the Ukrainian troops were essentially driven out of the town, and they were just still holding on in this industrial, chemical industrial area. So the way it was changed, actually, there were sent sort of reinforcements. One of it was this international volunteers unit, and then also like kind of like a hardcore Ukrainian battalion. So that was kind of like what, and the battalion is probably not the just the name, probably like 200 people essentially. So that would allow us to hold this area for now, but then they have heavy attrition there, heavy losses. Both sides have heavy losses, there's no doubt, but eventually this will lead, basically they will be, all of this kind of like a core, like hardcore soldiers will be sort of either wounded or killed in action, and eventually this probably will be surrendered. There's no other way to hold this bridgehead for the long term for Ukraine in the current condition, basically, and it doesn't serve much of the military purpose in general. So this is, and then also there were some reports by Russian sources, again not verified, that some of the, not from this two units, but there were like sort of original units there from militia and just regular Ukrainian troops, so that some of them were either surrendering or some like commander of the battalion was captured. This is all totally unverified, but obviously it's potentially a negative sign that these defenses here will not last much longer. But we'll see, obviously, next few days what's going on there. So, and actually, in terms of the front line, based on our information, the front line is actually a little bit sort of more in Ukrainian favor. So it kind of goes more along this, the sort of call it the border of this industrial complex here, not so much in depth of it. Now let's look what's going on here around the Popasna. Again, Russian attacks towards Bilogorivka, Berestove, Mykolaiv, typical sort of areas, Rubivka. At the same time, we sense just from other sort of indirect signals that the intensity of these attacks are not there anymore. And that's what when we mentioned at the very beginning, that it does feel that both sides are exhausted, and specifically ability of Russian side to continue these attacks, heavy pressure is exhausted. This obviously can change because they can pull sort of more resources from Russia, but apparently ability to pull resources from other stretches on front line and send them here are probably gone at this point. At the same time, we are seeing a lot of Russian equipment being moved from essentially Russian Far East. They have huge storage facilities, depots from the Soviet time, where they store a lot of sort of all kind of equipment, tanks and everything. So all of that equipment is being moved from essentially Far East to probably Central Russia or to those tank tank plants that we showed in Urals for refurbishment probably, and then they will be sent to the front line. But essentially, this what this also tells is that uh, Russian leadership is not giving up on their plans, and this is a long-term war of attrition. And we'll discuss tomorrow of the problem that's also related to artillery and all of that, like this sort of strategic situation where everything goes from Ukrainian side, because from Russian, I think viewers probably more or less clear at this point, and we would just want to discuss this whole strategic situation, and obviously artillery will be a big piece of that, so we'll discuss it tomorrow. But essentially, there's no changes on the front line today. Okay, now this is just a little bit closer look of this front line. Again, no changes there. And then also here in the southern section, again, there's no even progress by Wagner mercenaries, which are, as we mentioned before, better, more capable than regular Russian troops. And again, here this initial salient is this attack here also stalled, so it's very obviously it's very difficult situation, very dangerous situation for Ukrainian troops, but they managed sort of to stop Russian advances and advances of Wagner mercenaries essentially at the last moment. Also, there were sort of reserves were thrown here to Semihiri and Kadema by Ukrainian command. So essentially, probably ability of Russian troops to close this encirclement very low at this point. Now this is the situation of which we discussed. We don't know exactly, but this is a little bit in a way dated, that because Russian this Wagner mercenaries, they managed to gain some more area here. We unfortunately don't know. This is just sort of qualitative description, so we're kind of like hesitant to put it on the map here. But essentially, this bottleneck gets tighter, right? So essentially, probably might be even like sort of the sort of lifeline is through this village Semihirya, and this is also defended. This power plant is defended by Ukrainian troops here. So this is situation here. Now let's see what's going on straight west of Donetsk. Here everything is essentially quiet, just because the the Russian command pulled troops out of here, at least 2 brigades, maybe even. That's what we identified for sure. Could be more, but situation at this point here is quiet. Now we're gonna quickly look at the Zaporizhia front line, and we're just gonna even quickly skim, because essentially the same situation here. Everything's quiet, everything's on hold, and by quiet, what I mean is there is no large-scale attacks, right? There's always artillery shelling, always exchange of artillery fires, never stops, and there is always this reconnaissance or commander groups that are infiltrating, attacking each other. Just this stuff is always going on everywhere. So now let's move to Kherson bridgehead, and the situation here is identical to other areas. It's frozen. Both sides are digging in, and artillery shelling. This is sort of name of the game. We still believe that Ukrainian troops hold this Bruskinsky. Unfortunately, we still cannot confirm this, which would mean that the front line is kind of like this kind of little salient here. And then we do know for a fact that Russian troops kind of like on the flanks of this essentially. So we just don't have confirmation if Ukrainian troops are here. But if Russian troops here, most likely that Ukrainian troops hold to Bruskinsky, but we don't have 100% confirmation. Ken, thanks for watching today, and until tomorrow, bye bye.